A wounded dog stops in front of a gleaming Ferrari. The millionaire steps out of the car, unaware of what he's about to discover. What he saw left him speechless and would change his destiny forever. The red Ferrari wound through the twisting roads of Aspen, cutting through the crisp morning air as the sun began to gild the tops of the pine trees. Richard Montgomery, one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the country, barely paid attention to the road. His thoughts were focused on the dozens of voicemails playing through the car's sound system, all related to the latest developments in his company. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. Tell us which city you're watching from and let's continue. Mr. Montgomery, we need your approval for the new development sector project. One of the messages echoed when something unexpected made Richard slam on the brakes. A golden-haired dog stood in the middle of the road, staring directly at him with deep, expressive eyes. Richard's heart raced, not from the sudden stop, but from something in the animal's gaze that seemed to pierce his soul. It was as if, for a moment, his world of numbers, spreadsheets, and corporate meetings had been suspended by this unlikely encounter. "Hey, buddy," Richard got out of the car, surprising even himself with the gesture. The dog, instead of running away, began to move slowly, turning every few steps to check if it was being followed. Something about the animal's behavior piqued Richard's curiosity. Defying all his business instincts and meticulously planned routine, he decided to follow the dog. His Italian leather shoes, ill-suited for hiking, sank into the dirt as he ventured down an almost invisible trail through the vegetation. After a few minutes of walking, they reached a small clearing. The dog stopped near an area of disturbed earth and began to dig frantically. Richard, driven by a force he didn't understand, knelt beside the animal, completely ignoring the fact that his designer suit was getting dirty. What they found would change the course of their lives forever. A wooden box was partially buried, and inside were 4 puppies in poor condition. They were weak, dirty, and trembling. The golden dog, which Richard now realized was a female, lay down beside them, licking them with a maternal care that deeply moved the businessman. At that moment, something inside Richard shifted. He, who had always prided himself on his rationality and coolness in business, felt an overwhelming emotion take hold of his chest. Without hesitation, he improvised a space in the trunk of his Ferrari with his own jacket and carefully transported the puppies and their mother to the car. During the drive to the nearest veterinary clinic, Richard couldn't stop looking in the rearview mirror, watching how the mother dog remained protective beside her puppies. It was as if the animal had chosen him, specifically him, to help her. At the clinic of Dr. Henry Adams, a well-known veterinarian in the area, the situation began to take on even more intriguing contours. While examining the puppies, the vet shared information that made Richard frown. "Mr. Montgomery, this isn't an isolated case. In recent weeks, we've received several reports of abandoned puppies in similar situations in the area." The golden dog, who wouldn't leave her puppies for a second, looked at Richard as if she understood every word of the conversation. It was at that moment that he decided to name her Daisy, a name that came to him spontaneously, as if it had always been meant for her. "Dr. Adams, I want you to do whatever it takes to save these puppies. Don't worry about the costs," Richard declared, feeling a determination he usually reserved for his biggest business projects. As he watched Daisy and her puppies receiving their first care, Richard had no idea that this chance encounter on the road would be just the beginning of a much larger journey. A journey that would lead him to question his values, his priorities, and most importantly, the true meaning of success in his life. In the days following the rescue, Richard found himself torn between his business routine and frequent visits to the veterinary clinic. The puppies responded well to treatment, but something about the story continued to bother the businessman. During one of these visits, he noticed peculiar activity at the clinic's reception. An elderly woman, visibly distressed, was talking to the receptionist. "This is the 3rd case this month. I found another box of abandoned puppies near my cabin." Richard's ears perked up, his heart racing at the coincidence. "Dr. Adams," noticing Richard's interest, called him for a private conversation in his office. "Mr. Montgomery, there's something I need to share with you," the vet began, his normally serene face now marked by concern. "In the past 6 months, we've seen an alarming increase in cases like the one you found. And there's a pattern. The vet opened a folder on his computer, showing Richard a series of photographs. All of them showed boxes similar to the one he had found, always in remote areas of the region. The most intriguing part, Dr. Adams continued, is that all the puppies have specific characteristics of valuable breeds, even if they look like mutts at first glance. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. As a businessman, he knew the signs of organized operations. Dr. Adams, have you reported this to the authorities? The vet sighed deeply. Yes, but without concrete evidence, the investigations aren't moving forward. Besides, he hesitated for a moment before continuing, some important people in the area seem to want this matter kept quiet. At that moment, Daisy, who was lying in a corner of the room with her puppies, lifted her head and fixed her gaze on Richard. It was as if she understood every word of the conversation and was pleading for help. Richard felt a growing determination within him. I need to do something, he declared, more to himself than to the vet. Dr. Adams looked at him with a mix of relief and concern. Be careful, Mr. Montgomery. Powerful people might be involved. As he left the clinic that afternoon, Richard began making some calls. As one of the most influential tech entrepreneurs, he had connections that could help investigate the case discreetly. His first call was to Sophia Myers, an old friend who worked in animal protection. Sophia, I need your help, he began, explaining the situation. Her response surprised him. Richard, this is bigger than you think. I've been investigating similar cases in other regions of the state. As he drove back to his mansion, Richard reflected on how his life had changed drastically in just a few days. From a businessman focused solely on profits and expansion, he now found himself involved in an investigation into animal abandonment. The most surprising thing was that, for the first time in years, he felt he was doing something truly meaningful. At home, sitting in his office with a view of the immaculate gardens, Richard began organizing the information he had. On his screen, multiple windows showed maps of the region with the points where puppies had been found. A pattern was forming, but he couldn't quite see it yet. His phone rang, displaying an unknown number. When he answered, an electronically distorted voice sent a chill down his spine. Mr. Montgomery, your curiosity about certain matters is starting to bother important people. I suggest you focus on your business. Richard hung up the phone, feeling a mix of fear and indignation. He looked at Daisy, who had become his constant companion since the rescue, and saw in her eyes the same determination he now felt. He wouldn't back down. The morning after the anonymous call, Richard woke up with a fixed idea in his mind. If powerful people were trying to intimidate him, it meant he was on the right track. During breakfast on the terrace, watching Daisy play with her puppies, now much healthier, Sophia Myers arrived at his mansion. Richard, I've got something you need to see, Sophia said, opening her laptop on the breakfast table. In the past few months, I've catalogued all the cases similar to the one you found. There's an interesting pattern in the locations of the abandonments. Sophia showed a detailed map of the region, with red dots marking where puppies had been found. All the dots formed an almost perfect circle around a specific area in the mountains. See this property in the center? Sophia pointed to an apparently abandoned area. It's an old dog training center that closed 2 years ago. Officially it's abandoned, but locals report constant movement at night. Richard's heart raced. We need to investigate that place, he declared, already standing up. Sophia grabbed his arm. Wait, Richard, we can't just barge in there. We need to be more strategic. At that moment, Daisy approached the table, her ears alert and her body tense. It was as if she understood the gravity of the conversation. One of the puppies followed her, already showing the same attentive posture as his mother. Look at this, Sophia observed, pointing to the dog's behavior. Daisy isn't an ordinary dog. Her posture, her intelligence. She must have specific training. Richard approached Daisy, examining her more closely. Indeed, there was something special about her behavior, the way she reacted to conversations and situations. Sophia, do you think she could have come from that training center? It's a possibility, Sophia replied thoughtfully. What if she escaped from there? That would explain why she sought help so deliberately. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Adams, who had come to check on the puppies. Upon hearing Sophia's theory, his eyes widened. That makes a lot of sense, he said, examining Daisy more carefully. She shows characteristics of highly trained therapy dogs. Therapy dogs? Richard asked, intrigued. Dr. Adams nodded, continuing to examine Daisy. Yes, they're specially trained to work with people in hospitals, nursing homes, rehabilitation centers. The training is extensive and very specific. Sophia quickly searched something on her laptop. Richard, look, that training center, before it closed, specialized in preparing dogs for assisted therapy. It was one of the most renowned in the country. But why would such a successful center suddenly close? Richard questioned, already sensing they were close to something important. According to official records, financial problems, Sophia replied, continuing her research. But there's something strange here. At the time of the closure, they had just received a multi-million-dollar investment from a business group. Richard stood up and began pacing the terrace, his brain working at full speed. Years of business experience had taught him to recognize when something didn't add up. Sophia, can you find out who made that investment? I'm already on it, she replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. But the records are confusing. The investment came through a series of shell companies. It's going to take time to trace the source. Daisy approached Richard, nudging her nose against his hand. He knelt to pet her, noticing once again the depth of her gaze. You're trying to tell us something, aren't you, girl? At that moment, Richard's phone rang again. It was another unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering, putting it on speaker. The same distorted voice from the night before echoed across the terrace. Last chance, Montgomery. You have a lot to lose if you keep this up. After the phone threat, the atmosphere on the terrace grew tense. Sophia and Dr. Adams exchanged worried glances, while Richard remained silent, absorbing the gravity of the situation. Daisy, sensing the shift in mood, moved closer to him, resting her head on his knee in a comforting gesture. Richard, Sophia began, breaking the silence, maybe we should back off a bit. These threats seem serious. But something in Daisy's gaze made Richard shake his head. I can't stop now, Sophia. Look at her. He pointed to Daisy, who kept her eyes fixed on him. She chose us for a reason, and now that we're starting to piece things together, I can't just ignore what's happening. Dr. Adams, who had finished examining the puppies, joined the conversation. There's something you need to know, he said, his face serious. Last night, I had a strange visitor at the clinic. A well-dressed man offered a considerable sum to buy my silence about the abandonment cases. Richard felt his stomach churn. And what did you say? I pretended to accept, Dr. Adams replied, a determined glint in his eyes. I thought it would be more useful to make them think they'd bought me off. The man mentioned he'd return tonight with the money and more details on how to proceed. Sophia immediately began typing on her laptop. This is perfect. We can set up a... She stopped abruptly when Richard gestured for her to be quiet, pointing to the security cameras around the mansion. Understanding the message, everyone stood up and walked through the garden, seemingly admiring the flowers while speaking in hushed tones. Daisy followed closely, always alert. We need to be extremely careful, Richard whispered. If these people have the resources to threaten me and try to bribe Dr. Adams, they probably have ways to monitor us. As they walked, Sophia continued sharing her findings in a low voice. I've got more information about the training center. Before it closed, they had a revolutionary assisted therapy program. The results were impressive, especially with children in treatment. And why would they shut down something so successful? Richard asked, though he already suspected the answer. That's where it gets interesting, Sophia replied. The investment they received came with a condition, a complete change in management. The former director, Dr. Marina Stone, was removed and replaced by a group of businessmen with no experience with animals. Richard stopped walking, a sudden memory hitting him. Wait, Marina Stone. I met her at a charity event a few years ago. She had an incredible vision for the therapeutic potential of animals. Exactly, Sophia confirmed. And guess what's even more intriguing? She completely disappeared after being removed. No one knows her whereabouts. Daisy, who was a few steps ahead, suddenly stopped. Her ears twitched, catching some distant sound. The puppies, playing nearby, immediately ran to their mother. Something's wrong, Dr. Adams murmured, observing the dog's behavior. They're sensing something. At that moment, one of the mansion's security guards hurried over. Mr. Montgomery, there's a group of people insisting on speaking with you. They say they're from the Animal Protection Agency, but there's something off about their credentials. Richard exchanged meaningful looks with Sophia and Dr. Adams. "Keep them waiting at the gate," he instructed the guard. "I'll check it out personally." Turning to his friends, he spoke quickly. "We need to act now, Sophia. Use my computer in the office to continue your research. Dr. Adams, I want you to go to your clinic as if nothing's happening. Keep the appointment with that man tonight." "And you?" Sophia asked, concerned. "I'll receive our visitors," Richard replied, a plan already forming in his mind. "But first I need to make sure Daisy and the puppies are safe." As they walked back to the house, Richard couldn't help but notice how Daisy stayed close to him, as if she perfectly understood the gravity of the situation. Her expressive eyes seemed to say that, no matter what happened, they were in this together. Richard adjusted his tie as he walked toward the mansion's main gate. Years of tough negotiations had taught him to maintain composure, even in the most tense situations. On the way, he discreetly instructed his housekeeper, Mrs. Clara, to take Daisy and the puppies to a secure area of the house. "Mr. Montgomery," greeted the group's leader, a man in an impeccable suit that clashed with the typical image of an animal protection agent. "I'm Paul Mendonza, and we're here to investigate reports of animals being kept irregularly on your property." Richard kept his expression neutral, years of corporate meetings serving him well in this moment. "Interesting," he replied, examining the supposed credentials presented, "especially considering that all the adoptions and rescues I've made have been properly documented by Dr. Henry Adams, a well-known veterinarian in the area." While talking with the visitors in the garden, Richard noticed suspicious movements at the edges of his property. Through the reflection in the house's windows, he could see figures moving stealthily, as if searching for another way into the mansion. "Mr. Mendonza," Richard continued, maintaining his calm, "why don't you show me your credentials again? They seem a bit different from what I've seen in other official agency visits." The man hesitated for a split second, enough to confirm Richard's suspicions. At that moment, Sophia appeared at the front door carrying a folder. "Richard, good thing I found these gentlemen here," she exclaimed, approaching with a professional smile. "I just received official confirmation from the Central Animal Protection Agency about our new project. They mentioned that no inspections were scheduled for today." Paul Mendonza and his companions exchanged tense glances. Richard took a step forward, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in decisive negotiations. "Gentlemen, I suggest you leave now," he said, while discreetly pressing a button on his watch that alerted his security team. "And tell your superiors that Richard Montgomery isn't someone who's easily intimidated." After the group was forced to leave, Richard and Sophia hurried to the office. On the way, they found Mrs. Clara, visibly agitated. "Sir," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "Daisy is very restless. She's been growling at the walls of the safe room as if she senses something." Richard immediately went to the room where Daisy and the puppies were. He found the dog in an alert position, focused on a specific point on the wall. Sophia, who had followed him, began examining the area. "Richard, look at this," she called, pointing to a small, almost imperceptible irregularity in the wall. Upon closer inspection, they discovered a tiny, professionally installed listening device. "They've been monitoring us for a while," Richard concluded, a mix of anger and concern in his voice. "If it weren't for Daisy..." Sophia quickly checked her laptop. "Richard, I've got more information on Dr. Marina Stone. Before she disappeared, she was developing a revolutionary training program. Something about special canine abilities." "Special abilities?" Richard asked, watching Daisy, who remained alert. "Yes," Sophia continued, reading her files. "She believed that some dogs possessed extraordinary perception and intelligence. She was developing a method to identify and train these special animals." At that moment, Richard's phone rang. It was Dr. Adams. "Richard, you won't believe this. That man who tried to bribe me, he just called, moving our meeting up to this afternoon, and he mentioned bringing someone who really wants to meet me." Richard and Sophia exchanged meaningful looks. "Dr. Adams, keep the meeting," Richard instructed. "But you won't be alone. I have a plan." Daisy, who had insisted on accompanying them, remained remarkably calm by his side. Her presence was a constant reminder of the stakes involved. Richard knelt beside her, looking into her expressive eyes. "You're special, aren't you?" he murmured. "That's why you chose us. You knew exactly what you were doing from the start." The veterinary clinic was quiet that afternoon. Richard, strategically positioned in a room adjacent to the main office, waited with Sophia. Daisy, who had insisted on coming along, stayed unusually calm by his side. The puppies, now more energetic and playful, were safely back at the mansion under Mrs. Clara's watchful eye. "Are you sure about this?" Sophia whispered, adjusting the audio equipment they had discreetly installed in the office. Richard nodded, his expression resolute. "Dr. Adams knows the plan," he replied in a low voice. "Besides, I have a feeling about who might show up at this meeting." The sound of the front door opening made everyone tense. Footsteps approached the office, and the familiar voice of the man who had tried to bribe Dr. Adams echoed down the hallway. "Dr. Adams," the man greeted, his tone smooth but with an underlying edge. "I've brought someone who's very interested in your discretion." Richard's heart nearly stopped when he heard the next voice. It was elegant, feminine, and strangely familiar. "Dr. Adams," the woman said, her voice carrying a mix of authority and charm. "Your reputation precedes you. I've heard you've been very understanding about certain recent events." Sophia gripped Richard's arm. "It's Dr. Marina Stone," she whispered, incredulous. Daisy, upon hearing the voice, had an immediate reaction. Her ears perked up, and a slight tremor ran through her body, but she remained silent as if understanding the need for discretion. In the office, the conversation continued. "Dr. Stone, Dr. Adams replied, keeping his voice steady. "I must admit I'm surprised. The news about your disappearance—" "Sometimes, Doctor," Marina interrupted, her tone cold and calculated. "We need to disappear to realize our true potential. My work was far greater than what that training center could handle." Richard and Sophia exchanged glances. This wasn't the same Marina Stone Richard had met years ago at the charity event. Her voice, though elegant, carried a chilling undertone that hadn't been there before. "And what work would that be?" Dr. Adams asked, following the script they had prepared. "The future of animal therapy," Marina replied with artificial enthusiasm. "Imagine dogs with extraordinary abilities, Doctor. Not just for therapy, but for other purposes. Dogs that can detect diseases before doctors, predict behavioral changes, even manipulate people." Dr. Adams finished, his voice firmer now. A tense silence filled the room. "I see you understand the possibilities," Marina continued. "With the right training, these special animals can become powerful tools. The market for this kind of skill is immense." Daisy, still by Richard's side, trembled again. Her eyes, usually calm, now showed growing unease. "And the abandoned puppies?" Dr. Adams asked. "How do they fit into this plan?" "Ah, that," Marina laughed softly. "Let's just say not all experiments are successful, but the ones that are, well, they're worth every penny invested. Speaking of which, Doctor, I've brought something to seal our agreement." The sound of a briefcase being opened echoed through the audio feed. "Here's your first installment," said the man accompanying Marina, "with much more to come, as long as you maintain your discretion about certain incidents." Richard felt his blood boil. The transformation of Marina from a dedicated professional to someone capable of abandoning innocent animals was shocking. But before he could make a move, Daisy suddenly stood up, her eyes fixed on the door leading to the office. "What is it?" Sophia whispered, but her question was cut off by a sound from the office, a muffled cry of surprise. "Impossible!" Marina exclaimed. "How did you—" Richard and Sophia rushed to the door, only to find a surprising scene. In the office, Daisy stood at the entrance, staring at Marina Stone with an intensity that made the woman take several steps back. The office fell into a tense silence as Daisy and Marina Stone faced each other. Marina's expression oscillated between fear and fascination, her eyes locked on the golden dog she clearly recognized. "Project Aurora," Marina whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "You were my masterpiece." Richard and Sophia entered the office, positioning themselves strategically near the door to block any escape attempts. The man accompanying Marina made a move to reach for something inside his jacket, but Dr. Adams was quicker. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," the vet warned, his voice firm. "The police are already on their way." Marina regained some of her composure, a cold smile forming on her lips. "Richard Montgomery," she said, turning to face him, "I should have known you'd be involved in this. Always trying to be the hero, aren't you?" "What happened to you, Marina?" Richard asked, genuinely puzzled by the transformation of the woman he had known years ago. You were respected. Your work helped people. Helping people? Marina laughed bitterly. Do you know how much money there is in the market for specially trained dogs? Not just for therapy, but for private security, corporate espionage. The true potential was being wasted on therapy sessions with children. Daisy took a step forward, her eyes never leaving Marina. The woman involuntarily stepped back. She never forgot, did she? Sophia commented, watching the interaction. Daisy remembers everything you did. Daisy! Marina laughed again, but there was a tremor in her voice. That wasn't her name. She was Aurora, my greatest achievement, the first dog capable of identifying complex patterns of human behavior, of manipulating emotions, of choosing her targets. That's why she chose me on that road, Richard realized. She knew I had the resources and influence needed to expose all this. Always so perceptive, Marina mocked, but you don't truly understand what's at stake here. Project Aurora wasn't just about training dogs. It was about creating a new form of intelligence, one that could be controlled and sold to the highest bidder. Sophia stepped forward, her laptop open in her hands. And the abandoned puppies, the ones who didn't meet your expectations. Necessary casualties, Marina replied coldly. Not all specimens have the required genetic potential, but the ones that do, she looked back at Daisy, the ones that do are extraordinary. At that moment, sirens began to sound in the distance, rapidly approaching the clinic. The man accompanying Marina made a sudden move toward the door, but Daisy was faster. With a low, controlled growl, she kept him in place. It's over, Marina, Richard declared. All your research, the records of the experiments, the connections with buyers. We have everything documented. Are you sure? Marina smiled, her hand slipping into her bag. Sometimes, Richard, the truth isn't as simple as it seems. Before anyone could react, Marina pulled out a small electronic device. Aurora, she called, using Daisy's old name, Shadow Protocol. What happened next surprised everyone. Instead of obeying the command, Daisy simply tilted her head, her expressive eyes fixed on Marina with what seemed almost like pity. Impossible, Marina murmured, the device trembling in her hand. The conditioning, the control protocols. You never truly understood, did you? Richard said softly, moving closer to Daisy. You can't control love, true loyalty. Daisy isn't a tool, she's a living being, capable of making her own choices. The sirens grew louder, their wailing filling the air as police cars pulled up outside the clinic. Marina Santos, still clutching the now useless electronic device, seemed to have aged years in mere minutes. Her elegant demeanor had crumbled, revealing a woman consumed by her own ambition. You don't understand, she said, her voice now almost pleading. What we achieved with Project Aurora was revolutionary. Imagine the possibilities. Dogs that can detect lies, predict behaviors, influence decisions. Sophia, who continued to document everything on her laptop, interrupted. At the cost of how many innocent lives, Marina? How many puppies were abandoned because they didn't meet your standards? Daisy, still maintaining her position near the door, looked at her own puppies, who had been brought to the clinic earlier that day for checkups. Her protective gaze said everything about the true nature of love and loyalty. You turned something beautiful into a tool for manipulation, added Dr. Adams, his voice heavy with professional disdain. The bond between humans and animals should be about healing, not control. Richard stepped closer to Marina, his expression a mix of pity and determination. It's not too late to do the right thing. Tell us everything about the project, help us rescue the other animals. The sound of cars screeching to a halt outside the clinic filled the room. Marina glanced nervously at her companion, who remained frozen under Daisy's watchful gaze. You don't understand, Richard, Marina tried to argue one last time. There are powerful people involved in this, people who won't just let this come to light. That's why we need to act now, Sophia said, showing her laptop. While we were talking, all the data we collected was sent to multiple secure servers. There's no erasing this story now. The sound of footsteps approaching down the hallway drew everyone's attention. Daisy, surprisingly, relaxed her posture, as if recognizing that the situation was under control. Marina Santos, a commanding voice sounded from the doorway. We have a lot to discuss. Marina's expression turned to resignation as she saw the imposing figure entering the office. Richard immediately recognized the person. It was Judge Ana Mendez. a respected federal judge known for her work in environmental and animal protection cases. "Judge Mendez," Marina whispered, finally lowering the device in her hands. "The documents we received in the last few hours are quite interesting," the judge continued, her eyes scanning the room before settling on Daisy. "Especially the records of Project Aurora." Richard watched, fascinated, as Daisy naturally approached the judge, as if recognizing her. Judge Mendez bent slightly to stroke the dog's head. "You weren't the only ones investigating this situation," the judge explained, addressing Richard and his friends. "We've been monitoring suspicious activities related to the old training center for months. We just needed the right evidence." Sophia stepped forward, her laptop still in hand. "And now you have it. All the records, financial transactions, buyers involved?" "Yes," Judge Mendez agreed, her expression serious. "And thanks to your courage and Daisy's extraordinary intelligence, we can finally dismantle this entire operation." Marina, realizing all her options had been exhausted, let her shoulders slump in defeat. "What happens now?" "Now," the judge replied, "you're going to tell us everything. Every detail of the project, every animal involved, every person who participated. This is your chance to start making amends." Richard approached Daisy, who immediately leaned her head against his hand in a gesture of trust and affection. Watching the scene, Judge Mendez smiled slightly. "You know, Mr. Montgomery," she said, "sometimes the strongest bonds are the ones we can't see or control. Daisy didn't choose you by accident." In the weeks following the revelations at the clinic, Richard Montgomery's life underwent a profound transformation. His mansion, once a symbol of solitary corporate success, had become a temporary refuge for several dogs rescued from the old training center. On a particularly pleasant morning, Richard watched from the terrace as Daisy played with her puppies in the garden, now fully recovered and full of energy. Sophia, who had become a constant presence in the house, approached with a cup of coffee. "The test results are in," she announced, sitting beside him. "Dr. Adams confirmed that all the rescued dogs are responding well to treatment. Some show the same special abilities as Daisy, though on a smaller scale." Richard nodded, thoughtful. "What did Judge Mendez suggest about them?" "Anna has an interesting proposal," Sophia replied, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "She wants to turn the old training center into a legitimate institute for research and animal-assisted therapy. Under proper supervision, of course." The businessman smiled, watching as Daisy naturally guided the other dogs in the garden, demonstrating a serene leadership that always impressed him. "You know, Sophia, since Daisy came into my life, I've started questioning many things. What really matters? The true meaning of success. And have you reached any conclusions?" she asked, genuinely interested. "Yes," he replied, standing up to walk through the garden. "I realized that all my resources, all my influence, meant nothing if they weren't used to make a difference." At that moment, Dr. Adams arrived at the mansion, carrying a folder full of documents. His normally serene face was animated with news. "Richard, Sophia," he called, hurrying toward them. "You need to see this. Judge Mendez's team found something extraordinary in Marina's files." Sitting on the terrace, they examined the documents Dr. Adams had brought. They were detailed records of the early development of Project Aurora, before Marina had diverted its original purpose. "This is incredible," Sophia murmured, flipping through the pages. "The project started as legitimate research into dogs' natural abilities to assist in treating emotional trauma. Marina was genuinely trying to help people at first, until someone saw the potential for other purposes," Richard concluded, his voice heavy with understanding. "Power and money can corrupt even the best intentions." Daisy, noticing the seriousness of the conversation, approached the group, followed by her puppies. She rested her head on Richard's knee, her expressive eyes conveying a wisdom that went beyond any training. "What intrigues me," Dr. Adams began, petting one of the puppies, "is how Daisy maintained her essence despite all the conditioning, how she managed to break the programming and make her own choices." Sophia smiled, watching the interaction between Richard and Daisy. "Perhaps some connections are too strong to be manipulated. The true bond between humans and animals can't be manufactured or controlled. And that's exactly why," Richard said, standing with renewed determination, "we need to ensure this knowledge is used the right way from now on." He walked to his desk, where plans and projects were spread out. In recent days, he had worked tirelessly on a new initiative. "The Daisy Institute," he announced, showing the designs of a modern, welcoming complex. Not just a rehabilitation center for rescued animals, but a place where these dogs' special abilities can be used for good. Therapy, emotional support, trauma recovery. Sophia and Dr. Adams approached to examine the plans, while Daisy watched attentively, as if understanding every word. Autumn arrived in Aspen, painting the landscape with golden and red hues. On the grounds of the old training center, now undergoing renovation, Richard personally supervised the progress of the Daisy Institute. The place, once dark and shrouded in mystery, was gradually transforming into a welcoming, bright space. "The therapy areas will be here," he explained to the group accompanying him, which included Sophia, Dr. Adams, and Judge Anna Mendes. "We want to create environments that stimulate the natural connection between humans and animals." Daisy walked beside them, occasionally stopping to observe certain points on the grounds. Her puppies, now young and full of energy, followed the group with curiosity. "It's impressive how she still remembers everything," Judge Mendes commented, watching the dog's behavior. "Every stop she makes has meaning." Sophia consulted her notes on her tablet. "According to the records we recovered, many of the experiments took place exactly where she stops. It's as if she's showing us the history of this place. To turn something bad into good," Richard reflected, "we first need to acknowledge and understand what happened here." He knelt to pet Daisy, who responded by nuzzling his hand. The group reached a particularly wide, sunny area of the grounds. "This will be the main training area," Richard explained. "But unlike before, here the dogs will learn to use their natural abilities ethically and voluntarily. The first animal behavior specialists have already confirmed their participation in the project," Dr. Adams added. "Professionals who understand the importance of respect and true bonding in working with animals." Judge Mendes smiled, satisfied. "And the investigations have led us to other similar centers in different regions. Thanks to the information Marina provided, we're managing to dismantle the entire exploitation network." "How is she?" Sophia asked, referring to Marina. "Cooperating," the judge replied. "The remorse seems genuine. She's realized her knowledge can be used for good and is helping develop ethical protocols for working with special animals." Richard watched as one of Daisy's puppies played with a ball, demonstrating extraordinary intelligence and coordination. "You know, sometimes I think all this special talent was always there. We humans just complicated everything with our greed." "The true miracle," Dr. Adams agreed, "is their ability to forgive and start over. Look at Daisy. After everything she went through here, she chose to come back and turn this place into something positive." Sophia, who was constantly typing on her tablet, looked up with enthusiasm. "Registrations for the first therapy programs have already started coming in. We have families, schools, and even rehabilitation centers interested." "And the safety protocols?" Judge Mendes questioned, always attentive to legal aspects. "Implemented at every stage," Richard assured. "Surveillance cameras, specialized security teams, constant supervision of the training. Nothing like what happened before can happen again." The group reached a high point on the grounds, where they could see the entire future institute. The afternoon sun bathed the landscape in golden light, creating an almost magical atmosphere. "When I imagined this project," Richard said, his voice filled with emotion, "I thought I was just creating a rehabilitation center. But now I see it's much more than that. It's a place of healing for both animals and people." Daisy positioned herself beside him, her presence a constant reminder of how it all began. One of her puppies, the most attentive and observant, mimicked her posture, as if understanding the importance of the moment. "The Daisy Institute," Richard continued, "will be a testament that we can always choose a better path, that true power lies not in control, but in connection." 6 months after the renovations began, the Daisy Institute opened its doors to its first participants. The morning was clear and mild, typical of spring in Aspen, as the first group of children arrived for assisted therapy sessions. Richard, wearing a blue polo shirt with the Institute's logo, a golden silhouette of Daisy, watched with emotion as the young visitors stepped off the school bus, their eyes shining with anticipation. Beside him, Daisy maintained her serene posture, as if she knew exactly what was about to happen. Her calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the excitement of the children, who were eagerly looking around, their faces filled with curiosity and wonder. "Remember our first meeting?" Richard murmured to Daisy as they waited for the group to approach. "Who would have thought that sudden stop on the road would bring us here?" Sophia, now the Institute's operations director, approached with a clipboard in hand. "Everything's ready for the first session," she informed him. "The team is in position, and the therapy dogs have been prepared." Among the dogs selected for the program were two of Daisy's puppies, who had inherited not only her exceptional intelligence, but also her natural gentleness. Luna and Soul, as they were named, showed a special talent for interacting with children. "Good morning, kids," Dr. Adams greeted, who had become the Institute's head veterinarian. "Who's ready to meet our special friends?" The children responded with smiles and little shouts of joy. Among them, a quiet girl, partially hidden behind her teacher, caught Richard's attention. Her large, frightened eyes reminded him of someone carrying a lot of fear. As if reading his thoughts, Daisy moved softly toward the girl. She stopped a few steps away, sat down and simply waited, her gentle eyes fixed on the child. "Her name is Laura," the teacher whispered to Richard. "She hasn't spoken in 3 months since she went through a traumatic experience." Richard nodded, watching the silent interaction between Daisy and Laura. Slowly, the girl took a step out from behind her teacher. Daisy remained still, only her tail wagging softly against the ground in a calm, steady rhythm. "She's special," Richard said softly to Laura. "You know, she was also very scared once, but she found that sometimes we find strength in the most unexpected places." Laura looked at Richard and then back at Daisy. Her small fingers clutched the hem of her shirt, but her eyes no longer showed as much fear. "Would you like to meet her?" Richard invited, kneeling to be at the girl's level. "Her name is Daisy, and she'd love to be your friend." To everyone's surprise, Laura took a small step forward. Daisy maintained her calm posture, letting the girl decide each movement. When Laura finally extended her trembling hand, Daisy gently touched her nose to it. A soft sound escaped the girl's lips, not quite a word, but something close to a sigh of relief. The teacher brought her hands to her mouth, moved to tears. "This is just the beginning," Sophia said, watching the scene with misty eyes. "Imagine how many more lives we can touch here." Luna and Soul, Daisy's puppies, were already interacting with the other children, each demonstrating their own unique way of connecting. Luna had a particular talent for calming agitated children, while Soul seemed to know exactly when someone needed a moment of play. "It's incredible," Dr. Adams commented, joining the group. "Each dog has its own specialty, its own way of helping. And it all started with a choice, Daisy's choice to trust humans again." Sophia quickly typed something on her tablet. "Richard, look. That training center, before it closed, specialized in preparing dogs for assisted therapy. It was one of the most renowned in the country. But why would such a successful center suddenly close?" Richard questioned, already sensing they were close to something important. "According to official records, financial problems," Sophia replied, continuing her research. "But there's something strange here. At the time of the closure, they had just received a multi-million-dollar investment from a business group." Richard stood up and began pacing the terrace, his brain working at full speed. Years of business experience had taught him to recognize when something didn't add up. "Sophia, can you find out who made that investment?" "I'm already on it," she replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "But the records are confusing. The investment came through a series of shell companies. It's going to take time to trace the source." Daisy approached Richard, nudging her nose against his hand. He knelt to pet her, noticing once again the depth of her gaze. "You're trying to tell us something, aren't you, girl?" At that moment, Richard's phone rang again. It was another unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering, putting it on speaker. The same distorted voice from the night before echoed across the terrace. "Last chance, Montgomery. You have a lot to lose if you keep this up." After the phone threat, the atmosphere on the terrace grew tense. Sophia and Dr. Adams exchanged worried glances, while Richard remained silent, absorbing the gravity of the situation. Daisy, sensing the shift in mood, moved closer to him, resting her head on his knee in a comforting gesture. "Richard," Sophia began, breaking the silence, "maybe we should back off a bit. These threats seem serious." But something in Daisy's gaze made Richard shake his head. "I can't stop now, Sophia. Look at her." He pointed to Daisy, who kept her eyes fixed on him. "She chose us for a reason, and now that we're starting to piece things together, I can't just ignore what's happening. Dr. Adams, who had finished examining the puppies, joined the conversation. There's something you need to know, he said, his face serious. Last night, I had a strange visitor at the clinic. A well-dressed man offered a considerable sum to buy my silence about the abandonment cases. Richard felt his stomach churn. And what did you say? I pretended to accept, Dr. Adams replied, a determined glint in his eyes. I thought it would be more useful to make them think they'd bought me off. The man mentioned he'd return tonight with the money and more details on how to proceed. Sophia immediately began typing on her laptop. This is perfect. We can set up a... She stopped abruptly when Richard gestured for her to be quiet, pointing to the security cameras around the mansion. Understanding the message, everyone stood up and walked through the garden, seemingly admiring the flowers while speaking in hushed tones. Daisy followed closely, always alert. We need to be extremely careful, Richard whispered. If these people have the resources to threaten me and try to bribe Dr. Adams, they probably have ways to monitor us. As they walked, Sophia continued sharing her findings in a low voice. I've got more information about the training center. Before it closed, they had a revolutionary assisted therapy program. The results were impressive, especially with children in treatment. And why would they shut down something so successful? Richard asked, though he already suspected the answer. That's where it gets interesting, Sophia replied. The investment they received came with a condition, a complete change in management. The former director, Dr. Marina Stone, was removed and replaced by a group of businessmen with no experience with animals. Richard stopped walking, a sudden memory hitting him. Wait, Marina Stone. I met her at a charity event a few years ago. She had an incredible vision for the therapeutic potential of animals. Exactly, Sophia confirmed. And guess what's even more intriguing? She completely disappeared after being removed. No one knows her whereabouts. Daisy, who was a few steps ahead, suddenly stopped. Her ears twitched, catching some distant sound. The puppies, playing nearby, immediately ran to their mother. Something's wrong, Dr. Adams murmured, observing the dog's behavior. They're sensing something. At that moment, one of the mansion's security guards hurried over. Mr. Montgomery, there's a group of people insisting on speaking with you. They say they're from the Animal Protection Agency, but there's something off about their credentials. Richard exchanged meaningful looks with Sophia and Dr. Adams. Keep them waiting at the gate, he instructed the guard. I'll check it out personally. Turning to his friends, he spoke quickly. We need to act now, Sophia. Use my computer in the office to continue your research. Dr. Adams, I want you to go to your clinic as if nothing's happening. Keep the appointment with that man tonight. And you, Sophia asked, concerned. I'll receive our visitors, Richard replied, a plan already forming in his mind. But first I need to make sure Daisy and the puppies are safe. As they walked back to the house, Richard couldn't help but notice how Daisy stayed close to him, as if she